I can't lie for the purposes of like building a political ideology. Because at that point, like, you can quote me, like, I would rather Nazis take over the country if it just was the case that there's just no way to do LGBT argumentation without either engaging in lies, or that, like, if anybody sees a single fascist argument, they automatically turn into a Nazi. Like, if that's the case.
Friends, enemies, assorted potted plants. I'm going to have to say some unkind things about Destiny, heretofore referred to as Stephen, throughout this video. There's no real way around that, because the observable facts, those observable facts being that Stephen said, without a hint of irony or self-awareness, that Nazism was preferable to... well, I guess we'll get to that, are damning as they stand. Even the most neutral reading of Stephen's performance in this impromptu debate will be tinged with condemnation, because even the most neutral statement that could be made by a person of good conscience and moral clarity would still condemn him for invoking and inherently defending Nazi ideology and its various offshoots. The ideology of Nazism and its various philosophical children lead to the industrialized mass murder of civilians. This is not a hypothetical thought experiment. This is not a flippant, overwrought moral allegation. This is historic fact. And I want to focus on the word fact in that statement. We have more evidence supporting the historic account of the Holocaust than we have that the Earth revolves around the sun. And there are still living victims of the Nazi death camps. There are still living people who operated the Nazi death camps. If one were to hypothetically believe that the historic account of the Holocaust was either false or had been falsified in part or in whole, then that person would either be so uneducated that their opinion was of no merit, or that person would be arguing in bad faith. And in either case, they would not be worth engaging in conversation. Alternatively, if one were to believe that the simply staggering destruction of human life that had been caused by the Nazi regime was irrelevant to their ideology, then that person either does not consider human life and freedom a meaningful political goal, or they are acting in bad faith, and in either case, they are not worth engaging in conversation. I would have hoped that I didn't need to state all of that outright, but given who I'm dealing with and his audience, I thought it would be worthwhile to put that up front so that there is no confusion on the matter. One last note, throughout this video I will be referencing this impromptu debate between President Sunday and Stephen, which is currently hosted on President Sunday's channel, link in the description. I have modified it here so that whenever a statement is made, a timestamp is visible. Timestamps will also be provided underneath the video clip. So, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, during an impromptu debate with President Sunday, Stephen said, and I will quote him verbatim here, "I can't lie for the purposes of building a political ideology, because at that point, and you can quote me, I would rather Nazis take over the country. If it was just the case that there's just no way to do LGBT argumentation without engaging in lies, or that if anybody sees a single fascist argument they automatically turn into a Nazi, if that's the case, then fuck it. I won't waste my time." Those are the words that he used in the order that he used them, verbatim. And this is the thing that I wanted to talk about. Not just because this is a gobsmackingly tone-deaf statement on the face of it, but also because even understanding what Stephen is trying to say requires the context of at least the rest of the debate. And I feel like talking about it might reveal something worthwhile, both about Stephen and about how to engage with political pundits. This statement that I have quoted is difficult to even decipher, let alone interpret. And I can't even tell you what the most obvious interpretation of this statement is. Is Stephen trying to say that the ideology of Nazism is preferable to the ideology of trans people? Or is he saying that the ideology of trans people leads to Nazis taking control via political splitting and marginalization? Is Stephen saying that he values his ability to tell the truth more than he values the lives of, like, 1 in 10 people in the country that he and I live in? And more specifically, about 1/4 of the people in both his and my generation? Or is he saying that trans people lying will lead to a backlash which will take the form of ethno-nationalism? It is difficult to say. Minor sidebar. For clarity's sake, these are not rhetorical questions. I have Maybe not answers, but conclusions. It's just going to take a while to get there. Sit tight. Compounding that problem is what Stephen considers to be trans lies, as he explains earlier in the impromptu debate.
I'm also willing to stake out reasonable positions like saying, I don't think that cis women and trans women are biologically the same. I don't think that you can like self-ID and be whatever you want. And I don't think there are billions.
That's 2.5 claims. We'll get to the 1/2 in a second. The first claim is that trans women are claiming to be cis women in some capacity, and that's bad. The second claim is that people are identifying as whatever they want, and that is bad in some capacity. Much more interesting for our purposes is the first claim, which Stephen clarifies. I'm going to follow this up with a lengthy clip. It is Stephen's clarification, President Sunday's rebuttal, and Stephen's counter-rebuttal. All of this context is necessary to make a point.
There are
of course they aren't biologically the same. That's why the distinction exists. That's why they're called
yeah,
cis
but
women
even
and
just
trans
saying
women.
that, some people would argue is transphobic, which is what we're saying.
No. The question is whether or not they are still women, not whether they are biologically the same.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm telling you.
I know you do.
Yeah, I'm telling you that if you look through my doc, there are people that are arguing that like trans women have periods now. Or there are people like Vosh arguing that, well, technically they are biologically the same once their hormones change because we can classify a woman as biologically whatever we want. I understand what you're saying, and I would say like 4 years ago, but
that's correct though. Like the biological distinctions themselves, they don't come to us from nature. We pick out qualities and we label them.
I understand that, but I'm saying that there are people that are comfortable making the statement now, like trans women are women biologically. Like people are making those types of statements, and we could have a complicated discussion to get there, arguably. But like most people are going to hear that and think you're insane, and I think rightfully so. Because
I'm going to repeat the thing that Stephen said at the end there. I agree with you, and I understand what you're saying, but we cannot use this argument because it sounds insane. These claims share the same amorphous, bewildering, almost incomprehensible quality as the first statement. What is Stephen even trying to say? Does he make these 2.5 claims because he believes that they are important distinctions between his ideology and some other ideology? That seems to be what he's saying on the face of it. But then there's that acknowledgement at the end, that even if these claims are not lies, they seem like lies to ordinary people. And he appears to view that perception by ordinary people as being more important than the actual scientific and biological truth of the matter. And these are not small differences. If Stephen believes that identifying as a xenogender or as, I don't fucking know, a furry is a lie, or if he believes that a trans woman doing everything in her power to live like a woman, including taking hormones to make her more biologically like a woman, does not make her a woman, then we can conclude that he literally does not know the difference between what is true and what is not true. Alternatively, if he understands that these things are true, which he claims he does, but he believes that ordinary people are too stupid or hysterical to accept these facts, what the fuck do you even make of that? Is that arrogance? Is that despair? Does he just actually not care about the lives and well-being of trans people? I feel the need to state again that these are not rhetorical questions. I wasted 6 hours of my life watching this thing 4 times. I have come to conclusions. Sit tight. The one thing that is absolutely certain from that reading is that Stephen thinks that he is entitled to dictate to trans people the terms of trans acceptance, which makes him not a co-conspirator, not an ally, not on the side of trans people. If one were to hypothetically believe that they were entitled to dictate to an oppressed people the terms in which those oppressed people would be accepted into wider society, then that hypothetical person would necessarily and definitionally be an oppressor. And in this case, that hypothetical person is Stephen. And if that's where Stephen is ideologically, then it makes perfect sense that he believes that trans rights are a greater threat to society than Nazism. Because the Nazis are coming right to him. They're doing things on his terms. The trans people are not. And that perception, that idea that Nazism is less harmful than some sort of progressive orthodoxy, is worth talking about. Not just because it's indicative of a very specific vulgar mindset, but because, truth be told, talking about just 1 or 2 or even 3 clips is kind of missing the forest for the trees. This impromptu debate was not even about whether or not Stephen is a fascist or a fascist supporter. It was about Stephen taking issue with President Sunday criticizing Stephen's manifesto. And when you look at the entirety of Stephen's performance, when you look at the debate as a whole, you find that it is entirely suffused, that it is dripping and drooling with a specific language of petty grievance and aggrieved entitlement. This starts even at the very beginning. President Sunday initially appeared on the stream in order to ask Steve to tell his fans to lay off of his friends. Stephen's response? Verbatim? I super don't care.
One of them in particular.
I super don't care.
I super don't care. He goes on to say that
if they're willing to go publicly and criticize me, then they should be ready to take public criticism, especially their public-facing Twitter accounts. Why the fuck would I care about that?
literally what Stephen is saying here is that having a Twitter profile and criticizing him is not just reason enough, but moral justification enough for him and his entire goon squad to come at you with whatever they've got. Or, to put it more succinctly, Stephen has said and seems to believe that if you have a profile in a public space online, then not only him, but his entire fan base is entitled to your time and your energy. Luckily, I don't have a Twitter profile. I was banned from Twitter for saying that I was going to piss on Henry Kissinger's grave. And I will, because he is an old and weak war criminal. It's not even just that, though. Throughout the debate, whenever Stephen refers to trans people or trans advocates, it is almost always with contempt or disgust.
One of those interventions is this concept that I'm like a Nazi, which a lot of people accuse me of being. So having a section called, I think, the trans question is like just a funny way of like being provocative and hitting at that like I'm a Nazi thing, and then make. I think trans activism is where a lot of this anti-trans legislation is coming from. I think that it's bolstering it, because when you see people saying things like no, women and trans women are the same, trans sports should be, or women's sports should be eliminated. My 4-year-old is trans. When you're starting to see that coming up more and more, and then you're starting to see people defend it, I think that emboldens the other side. It galvanizes them.
But you aren't talking about trans activists then. You're talking about a tiny subset of trans YouTubers.
Yeah, I'm talking about what it seems to be the case for a lot of left-leaning actors online versus right-leaning actors. That seems to be a trend. If I'm wrong, that'd be great. I'd like it to be the case. But it seems to be that almost every large left-leaning person, ironically enough, is like hyper-capitalist and consumerist in the way that they go about like making money and doing content.
I don't know.
I'm not even tearing down anybody worth tearing down. It's all just a bunch of garbage activists that are looking to get like social clout and money. I think that's the issue.
Okay, but you're not just tearing down bad actors though. You're also in the process building up actors who want to destroy the smaller people who are not those activists.
When he talks about specific trans advocates, Vosh and Keffels, it is with obvious rage.
Look at, like, Vosh has made objectively more transphobic statements than I ever have. He's gone on some wild rants. But why don't people...
Case in point.
Well, no, case in point for me. How is he accepted now? He changed all of his positions on trans stuff. You can find videos where, this would have been a good part of the manifesto. He used to be anti-xenogender, he used to be anti-neopronouns, and he used to be anti-self-ID. He proudly adheres to all three of those positions as vocally as possible today. He'll support xenogenders, he'll support self-ID, and he supports neopronouns, and then he throws his weight behind people like Keffels, who is the embodiment of the trans activists that he used to explicitly hate like 2 years ago. A type of good that I don't think any of the activists are capable of doing, because they can't. No normal person that's not like ultra politically engaged or ultra pro-trans is ever listening to somebody like Keffels.
Minor sidebar. I am not here to defend Vosh or Keffels in any capacity. Vosh has demonstrated that he either does not understand or is willing to pretend that he does not understand the difference between enacting a genocide and ending a genocide. And Keffels... Hiya. Futuron furnishing an interruption from the year 2022. So, I had some minor criticisms of Keffels in this part, but since I wrote the script for this video, it is all scripted, Keffels has been forced to move twice due to harassment from the lovable, bigoted shitheads at Kiwi Farms. And however I or you may or may not feel about Keffels, please understand that Kiwi Farms is one of the worst places on the internet. It genuinely offends me that they are on the same internet that I am. And I am a friend and a comrade to anyone who is being attacked by them. Bearing that in mind, I am willing to redact my criticisms of Keffels, at least at this time. Stephen claims to be an ally and an advocate for trans people, only to then immediately turn around and demand that trans people are only valid if and when they fit into his idea of what a trans person is, as I already stated. But there's a flip side to that. Throughout the video, Stephen... I need to phrase this carefully. Stephen does not defend fascism or fascist ideology, but he does specifically defend certain fascists, going so far as to praise some of them directly by name.
When it comes to people like Nick Fuentes and Lawrence Southern, I think that what they do to push their political ideology is incredibly respectable. I mean, if Nick is literally getting sitting representatives of Congress to his fucking meetings, or Lauren is flying around the world filming documentaries...
That probably speaks very poorly for a lot of sitting members of Congress. That does not make what he's doing respectable.
We can adjust the downward bar of all of humanity if you want, but it doesn't change the point that I'm making. The level of political engagement that those two actors have compared to Hassan and Vosh and Keffels is unbelievable.
And, first of all, no, Stephen. Under no circumstances do you have to hand it to the Nazis. But second, and more importantly, consider who he's talking about in the specific context of this wall of text that he said we could quote. Stephen claims to prefer Nazi ideology to having to lie for trans people, but we can see now that when he's talking about Nazis, he's not talking about them in a general sense. He's talking specifically about Lawrence Southern and Nick fucking Fuentes. Lawrence Southern, who has made an entire career lying about immigrants. Nick fucking Fuentes, who's an open Holocaust denier. You know that thing that we have more evidence supporting than we have evidence that the Earth revolves around the sun? Nick Fuentes believed it never fucking happened. And again, it's like, what the fuck do you even make of that? Is he saying that a Holocaust denier is more honest than a trans person? Is he suggesting that a trans person exaggerating the effect of their hormones is a greater threat to the stability of society than someone who believes that the ruthless murder of 12 million people never fucking happened to a room packed full of congressional representatives, no less? What the fuck do you have to be high on? Stop. No, that is not what Stephen is saying. I don't just say that because that is very nearly the least charitable interpretation of Stephen's words, but also because I genuinely believe that is not what Stephen is trying to say. Stephen is a lot of shitty things, but he is not a Holocaust denier. I will give him at least that much credit. There is a much simpler and a much more charitable explanation for all of this. Or at least I believe that there is a much simpler and much more charitable explanation for all of this. So, my perception is that this comes down to definitions and intent. On the face of it, Stephen is referring to trans people generally and Nazis generally. But I don't think that's what he means. Given the context of the rest of the video, I believe that when he is talking about Nazis, he is talking about specific Nazis that he knows and interacts with fairly regularly. The same holds true for trans people and their advocates. Stephen isn't talking about trans people generally, he is talking about specific trans people and specific trans advocates that he knows and interacts with on a regular basis. Which leads me to believe that when Stephen says this, what he means is trans people and their advocates that I know have lied to me and about me. Nazis that I know have not. Consequently, I trust the Nazis I know to preserve my freedoms more than I trust the trans people and their advocates that I know to preserve my freedoms. And, that's still really shitty. It's also functionally wrong. Nick Fuentes and Richard Spencer have no desire to preserve anyone's freedoms, not even their freedom of speech. But yeah. On the other hand, pretty sure Stephen doesn't believe that trans people existing is literally worse than Nazis taking over the country. I'm pretty sure that Stephen doesn't believe that trans people talking about their biology or identifying as whatever is going to lead to Nazis taking over the country. I believe Stephen does care about trans people, and all the other people that Nazis would presumably kill if they gain control over the country. I do not believe that Stephen would identify as a fascist, or even that he takes the ideology of fascism very seriously. I do believe that Stephen has found that he is more comfortable with the fascists that he knows than he is with the trans people and trans advocates that he knows. Because the fascists are nice to him, and the trans advocates and trans people are not. And I believe that Stephen is making decisions about who to politically support, consciously or unconsciously, based on who makes him feel more comfortable. And I want to make a note of how far I had to stretch to get a definition that was even halfway charitable to Stephen. None of the original statement is even in there anymore. I watched this thing 4 times. I wasted 6 hours of my That's not true. I listened to it while playing Dead Cells. Playing Dead Cells is never a waste of time. It's an awesome game. Sidebar, I would also maintain that Stephen is still definitionally an oppressor of trans people. He is not an advocate, despite how much he claims that he is. Not taking back a word of that. I don't like drama. And that doesn't just go for internet drama. I don't like real-life conflicts of personality either. And that's mostly a personal thing. I've never felt the need to pry into someone's personal life any more than that person felt comfortable with. I'm actually kind of contemptuous of people who do nothing but cover banal internet drama all day. They're the YouTube equivalent of TMZ or Gawker, prying into people's private lives because they insist that some people find it entertaining. It has been my experience that no one is entertained by hearing gossip, but plenty of people are entertained by spreading gossip. I don't think these people really like finding out what goes on in people's minds or finding out what kinds of things they do in private. They're entertained by the sense of control, by the opportunity to pass judgment and condemn. And maybe it's a personal failing on my part, but I've always found these kinds of things to be just a little bit loathsome. Like, even the most benign versions of these things like Entertainment Tonight or Good Morning America, I've always found them to be entirely insufferable. And yet, here I am, whining about one statement that Stephen made over the course of an hour-and-a-half-long live stream, and then going over that hour-and-a-half-long live stream as many times as I can to try to contextualize that statement. I'm not too petty to admit that some of it is just outrage. Stephen does have one genuine talent, and that talent is making people of good conscience and moral clarity incredibly mad at him for incredibly petty reasons. Myself included. But the more I listened, the more interested I became. Not because what Stephen was saying was compelling, it wasn't, and it isn't, at least not on the face of it, but because of the unabashed lack of self-awareness. I've told you the conclusion I was able to draw from all this, that Stephen is more comfortable around his Nazi friends than he is his trans friends because his trans friends are mean to him and his Nazi friends are nice to him. But it's worth noting that Stephen himself may not be aware of this. Like, the best defense of this wall of text, this thing that we started out with, this thing that he demanded that we quote, isn't that he meant something almost entirely unrelated to the words that he actually used. It's that this thing is almost entirely incomprehensible on its own. He thinks that he's saying something important and impactful, but in reality what he's saying is just a step above actual word salad. And that lack of self-awareness is what I hope I've been able to zero in on. Because that lack of self-awareness typically only comes from cloistering yourself inside a specific information silo. Stephen, once upon a time, was considered to be pretty far on the left. And figuring out how he went from there to Nazis are going to defend my rights more than trans people would be valuable in and of itself. So the question becomes, how do you do that? And, like, all cards on the table? I don't know. Like, Stephen streams 10 hours a day, right? I'm not going to go through 10 hours worth of video for every day for 8 years. I have neither the time, nor the energy, nor the patience to do that. I only barely had the patience to go through this thing as many times as I did. And I have a less than zero interest in talking to Steve specifically, for a multitude of reasons. Let me give you one. There's this incredibly scummy thing that I noticed Stephen doing throughout the debate. He would make a wild, outrageous claim, immediately get called on it, backpedal, get called on it again, and then retract the statement fully. And then he would pretend that he hadn't retracted it, that he hadn't even backpedaled it at all. That's not just some Tucker Carlson level bullshit, that's some Alex Jones level bullshit. It is inherently dishonest, and it demonstrates that Stephen is entirely unwilling to accept criticism or new information. Also, you don't deal with shitposters by giving them a platform, you deal with shitposters by locking them out of the conversation. People who don't act in good faith don't deserve a platform, and that's something that I've been saying for years. I guess he has a manifesto, but... like, the last time I tried to read a manifesto, I only got halfway through it. So much math. So much math. So that's right out. What is the point of all this? Like, I don't just want to be dunking on someone and calling them a mark, even someone as loathsome as Stephen has become. And, like, even if I could prove, with math, with 1,000 pages of inscrutable calculations, that Stephen was a moron, or a fascist, or a cuck, what would that mean? Besides the literal or figurative definitions of the traits that I may or may not be accusing Stephen of having, what would be the point of the thing? And I don't just want to transit whatever qualities I'm accusing Stephen of having onto his audience, not just because that's needlessly hostile, but because it's literally wrong, and I can prove that with math. I need to make that video about Trump's voters sometime soon. And that extends to, like... I don't think that it would be useful or helpful to call Stephen out on Twitter or on YouTube or on whatever social media platform the cool kids are using right now. Stephen isn't interested in learning or growing. He'd just grumble about it for a couple of days and then move on. Also, didn't Stephen get kicked off of Twitch for telling people to gun down non-violent protesters? I don't think that there's anything that I can do or that any other person can do to him that would be worse than that. And that's to say nothing of how shitty Stephen's fans are. Like, I've already had fans of one aggrieved white shithead throw a Molotov cocktail through one of my windows. There's a scorch mark on the carpet to prove it. Although I will grant that I live in a very rough part of town, so that could have been an unrelated and mundane attempted arson. And... listen, if you think that everything I've said over the past few minutes is me taking the L, or if I'm having some kind of pseudo-breakdown, or if you think I'm just pissing questions into a hurricane, you haven't been paying attention. I am not interested in rhetorical questions, and what is the point of this is not one of those, should never be one of those. Rather, me asking you what the point is gives me a chance to tell you what the point is, in case you missed it. Gives me a chance to reframe the entire video. Because I know what my point is. I'm not saying that Stephen is bad or stupid or a fascist or even a fascist sympathizer. I'm saying that Stephen, in spite of the fact that he thinks that he is saying things that are important and impactful, doesn't even know what he's saying. The words that he demanded that we listen to are only barely indistinguishable from word salad. In spite of all of his pomp and self-appointed grandiosity, Stephen doesn't have a fucking point. And that is a problem. Not just because it means that he's been lying to himself and his audience, but more importantly because it makes arguing with him impossible. How do you argue with someone who struggles to even be coherent? If Stephen decides who he supports based on who is nice to him and who argues with him, then the fact that you're arguing with him at all means that he's already decided not to take your side. And if all of that is the case, which I hope I have proven that it is, then what is even the point in talking to him? And if I can convince you that there's no point in talking to Stephen, and show you why that is, as I hope I have, there's value in that. Because then, maybe you can avoid that pitfall. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Great job. I barely finished editing this thing. Make sure to leave a like if you liked the video, a dislike if you disliked the video, a comment if you have something to say, and I am not too proud to mention that there is a coffee link in the description of the video. If you can spare a couple dollars, I could use it to buy groceries or something. Actually, my computer can use that new RAM. Look at this stutter every time it switches from one clip to the next. You know, normally I'd tell you to subscribe, but this is way outside of my typical wheelhouse. I talk about real politics kind of stuff. You know, I'm not even gonna lie. I just had an axe to grind here. Not in the sense that I had a vendetta, but I feel like people give Stephen a lot more credit than he deserves. But yeah, I have more scripts prepared, more scripts about real politics stuff, not this nonsense. So maybe look forward to that in the future. Politics is kind of my thing. But yeah, until next time we meet, go outside, do something important, and take care of yourself, alright?